He lived alone in the mountains, where winters swallowed every sound. But one frozen morning, a faint cry cut through the silence. Beneath a drift of snow, he found a plastic bag, and inside it, a blind bobcat kitten, barely breathing. When he lifted that trembling life against his chest, he didn't know he was saving more than the cub. He was saving the part of himself that still knew how to feel. Dawn lifted over the aspens like a held breath. Snow lay smooth as porcelain, each drift catching a seam of blue light. From his cabin ridge, TomReed listened to the hush the mountains keep for themselves. Then, from somewhere below the wind line, a thin sound threaded the cold, frail, irregular, not wind, not branch. He felt it more than heard it, a tug through the stillness. He stepped off the porch, and the snow squeaked under his boots. That small, clean noise that makes a man measure his weight. Cold nipped the edge of his lashes. The sound came again, a brittle mew that broke and faded. He studied the slope, reading it the way some people read faces, and angled toward a seam of drifted white under a fallen pine. The world tightened down there, less sky, more shadow. Frost sequined the dead needles. A squirrel track stitched the powder, then vanished. The cry shivered once and went quiet. Tom crouched beside a hummock of snow that didn't hold its shape like it should. The surface sunken, a corner of plastic gone dull and stiff where ice had chewed it. He brushed away powder with the back of his glove. A heavy, clear bag slumped open-mouthed, its rim crusted in grey slush. Something metal knocked softly inside. A tired clink that sounded like a lie. A rust smear ringed the plastic, thin as a cut. He felt the hairs on his arms rise, the way they do when a truth is about to show its face. Carefully, he split the taped seam. A smell came first old, cold, damp fur, the faint iron of blood thinned by snow. Curled in the bottom lay a bobcat kitten, small enough to rest in two hands. Its fur was winter faded and matted into ridges, where eyes should shine. A milk blue film clouded both, like frost sealed on glass. Breath struggled low and shallow. The kitten tried to lift its head and couldn't. Its whiskers trembled, tasting air as if air could feed it. Paws tucked tight. It made a sound too thin to be called a cry. The world to it was heat or not heat, touch or absence. It turned toward the warmth of Tom's wrist, as if that were the only compass left. Snow dusted its ears and did not melt. Tom slid off a wool scarf and formed a cradle, tucking the small body into the hollow. Heat bled from his palms into the stunned chill of fur and bone. Beneath the bag, half buried, his glove found a snapped jaw of steel old trap spring, teeth blunted but mean enough. Nearby, the print of a boot had frozen hard. A tire groove bit through the crust and out to the road. He straightened, the bag rustling at his knee, and looked downslope where the trees cleared into a narrow cut. Rules lived out here, some written, most not. Leave wild to wild. Don't make it worse. But the kitten's foreleg lifted and fell against his thumb. Not a grasp so much as a question. He felt the question all the way up his arm. Wind slipped the branches and then stilled. A pair of ravens swung low, black on white, their voices rough as rope. Tom listened for the mother he would rather find than this, for any sound that would let him set the scarf back down and walk away clean. Only the cold answered, the kind that eats edges first and then centers. He drew the scarf closer to his chest. The metal clack inside the bag knocked again, like a memory trying to get back in. He pictured hands that taped and tossed, the easy arc down the slope, how the snow receives what the world won't. The kitten's breath ticked shallow against his shirt, its head seeking a heartbeat it didn't know it could trust. A crack rolled across the basin sharp, flat, carried by the bowl of the valley. He froze, the sound arriving first as noise, then meaning. Not a branch, not ice. A rifle somewhere to the north, beyond the second stand of aspen. Echo chased echo until the mountains swallowed both. The kitten flinched, a small stutter against his ribs. Tom's jaw tightened. He set the mangled spring back into the drift with his boot and shouldered the bag to bury its shine. Snow began to sift again, thin as ash. He took a breath so deep it stung and started up the slope, placing his feet in the old tracks he had made coming down. The cleanest way to leave as little new trouble as possible. The climb was slow. Each step pressed heat into cold and gave it away. He could feel the kitten's weight as hardly weight at all. More a presence, a pulse that refused silence. The mountain watched the way mountains do without judgment, only witness. He kept his eyes on the cabin roofline, a dark line under brighter sky. At the porch, he paused, listening for the world behind him to change its mind. The ravens had gone quiet. The rifle's ghost was long spent. He opened the door and warm air tumbled out. Wood smoke and the day's first coffee. The small human weather he had made for himself here. The kitten shifted in the scarf, turning toward the heat like toward a name. Inside, he knelt by the stove and fed the fire a stick at a time. the way you talk to a skittish thing. He laid the scarf in a shallow box, lined it with an old flannel shirt, and let his palm rest lightly along the kitten's back until its breath found a steadier lane. Outside, a soft drift slipped from the eaves, the sound like a sigh. He stood and watched the rise and fall, the slow claiming of warmth by something that had almost left. A clock he rarely wound ticked once. The room narrowed to flame, fur, and the thin gold seam of light under the door. He told himself this was a beginning, not a mistake, though beginnings and mistakes often shared the same shape at first light. The mountains held their quiet. Snow feathered past the glass and didn't ask for permission. The kitten's ears flicked once, twice, as if counting the room. Tom set water to warm, found the small dropper he kept for birds that hit the window. He didn't speak. Some promises, the real ones, are made without words and kept in the spaces words can't reach. Morning thinned to a pale ribbon at the cabin windows. The kitten lay in the flannel-lined box, breath shallow but steadier, nose tilted toward the stove's low hum. Each sound in the room arrived like a map tick. Crackle, the soft rasp of wool. Blind eyes filmed in milk blue did not blink. Yet the ears tracked warmth the way a river tracks gravity. Tom warmed water in a tin cup and mixed a thin formula, the kind he once kept for stunned songbirds. He pinched the dropper, touched the kitten's lip. At first it refused, jaw set with a tired courage. Then the mouth loosened and the throat worked. A few drops vanished. He waited, counted to 10, offered more. Patience is a bridge you build one board at a time. A smear of old grease on the counter caught the light, and he thought of hands that taped a plastic mouth shut. He pushed the thought away, leaned closer to the small spine under his palm. The kitten's whiskers trembled, tasting air and the salt of a man who had walked uphill carrying something he could not name yet. "Easy," he said, voice barely a weather shift. He lifted the tiny body to weigh it, and it weighed almost nothing, like a question, like a chance. The paws curled, then spread. One forepaw rose and pressed clumsily against his shirt. Not a hold, so much as a test. He felt the touch through wool and skin. A coin of warmth exchanged. The kitten kept breathing. Slow labor into a dark it did not fear, only learned. When the stove sighed, the kitten answered with a thread of sound. Tom set a hot brick beneath the box, wrapped it in cloth, made a pocket of heat. Outside, wind brushed the aspens like a hand calming a skittish horse. Inside, the room shrank to small work. Rinse the dropper. Change the shirt lining. Tuck the scarf edge closer to a cold ear. He reached for the old radio and clicked it on. Static rose, then steadied. He called Deputy Clara Hayes. Voice low. He described what he'd found. How the eyes were clouded. How a trapjaw lay half buried in snow. Clara's answer carried the weight of a badge and a person. State law. Rehab centers. Permits. She softened at the edges. Hold on, she said. Don't do this alone. He didn't argue. He hung up and dialed a number his hands remembered. Dr. Lewis Harland, who had once stitched a fox in this very kitchen. The vet's voice arrived with gravel and kindness. He asked about temperature, gum colour, the slow pinch of skin at the scruff. Dehydrated. But there's fight, he said. Small sips, warmth, no force. Let it decide life with you, not for you. The kitten shifted as if to answer the man it couldn't hear. Tom draped another layer across the box. He watched the rise and fall until his own shoulders matched its rhythm. In the blind face he saw not absence, but a different kind of sight, listening with bone, reading with whiskers, stitching a world together from textures and breath. He wiped the counter, then the sink, then the memory of a still jaw. When he looked back, the kitten's head was angled toward him, as if the air around his chest had a sound. He slid 2 fingers under the chin, felt a pulse counting time no clock owned. A hush climbed the walls. Snowmelt ticked somewhere in the roofline. The dropper waited, half full and patient. Clara's truck rumbled into the turn below the cabin. She stepped in with her coat half unzipped, cheeks bright with cold, badge catching a dull shine. She knelt without speaking, studying the kitten the way good officers study people without pity, with respect. He's a fighter, she said. Law sat on her shoulder like a crow, and fighters deserve a fair fight. They spoke softly about rehab centers, about the letter of things and the spirit that writes between those lines. Clara's phone chirped news of a busted camp, a name tied to old trouble. She pocketed it with a look that meant later. I can't tell you to keep him, she said, but I can tell you how a story sometimes asks more of us than a rule does. After she left, the house felt larger and quieter. Tom fed the stove and set the cup to warm again. The kitten lifted its head a fraction, lip-seeking, tongue flicking to find what the nose had promised. He offered the dropper. and this time the swallow came easier. Tiny paws flexed, unfurling like winter buds, daring the sun to return. He settled into the old chair and held the box on his knees. The kitten drifted in and out, each doze a stitched seam, each waking a small stubbornness. Outside, a cloud moved off the sun, and a wash of pale gold crossed the floorboards. The kitten turned its face to that warmth and sighed. A sound so small it remade the room. Tom named it then. Almost without thinking, Milo. Milo slept, and the name settled around him like a blanket that fit. When he startled, the forepaw rose again and found Tom's chest. That same clumsy press this time stayed a heartbeat longer. He felt the message in it. Simple as fire and bread, here, still here. He leaned back, eyes on the stove's red throat, and let the day unclench by degrees, one breath at a time. Snowlight pooled along the baseboards, a thin river of milk blue that stopped at Milo's box. He lifted his head to it, ears angling, whiskers tasting the ripple of warmer air. The room made a quiet map, stove breath, pipe tick, the low murmur of a man moving. Blind eyes filmed and steady. He followed heat and scent the way others followed sight. Tom packed a small rucksack and checked the radio twice. Leather spoke soft at his shoulder. Metal touched wood with a modest click. Milo turned toward those sounds, then toward the wool sleeve that meant food and safety. A palm hovered over his ribs. He leaned into it. Small weight spending trust. Outside, a truck coughed to life and idled down. When the door closed, the house exhaled. Milo listened to absence as if it were a language. Snow fell in little sentences off the eaves. A mouse braided frost under the sink. He rose, unsteady but willing, and poured forward until his nose met the flannel edge. The world smelled like ash and pine, and the man's coat quiet, kind, a weather of its own. The box lip nudged his chest. He tested the floor with one paw, then two. His claws clicked once, careful and light, and he froze to read the air for shape. He mapped the kitchen leg by leg, chair, mat, the cool metal bowl. When his whiskers brushed the stove's warm panel, he turned his face away from too close heat and settled into the glow beneath. Far off, wind pushed through the aspens and braided with another smell fainter, metallic, old rain on iron. Milo's ears twitched and stilled. He had known that language in shadows he couldn't remember. A rule written in hurt and hunger. He curled tighter, small spine drawing into a comma, breath working to the stove's patient count. On the ridge, Clara's truck nosed through powder while Tom walked ahead, reading snow like print. The story there was blunt, boot tracks broad as shovels, a dragline, the sharp letter of a tire. He found what he didn't want first snagged on a deadfall, a body already going to the cold, and beside it the broken jaw of a trap, teeth fat with rust. Clara held the camera steady while silence did the talking. Tom knelt and didn't touch. The cat had been a mother, milk scent still faint in the fur of her belly. No eyes watched them from the trees. Even the birds kept their counsel. Wind flipped a corner of tarp in the brush, and the sound made the back of his neck remember the bag he had opened. They found a trail camera half buried in rime. The card coughed up hours of deer and wind until a hooded man stepped into the frame. A gloved hand swung a clear bag once, twice, and let it fall. Snow swallowed the thud. The man moved off. Sleeve catching light, a small stitched emblem shaped like a claw. The image held, then blinked away. Back at the cabin, the floor warmed under the day. Milo woke when the latch turned, his nose reading the door seam before it moved. Tom's coat came in first cold, wet, threaded with a new edge that wasn't weather. Milo lifted, paused searching, and found the cuff. The cloth told him stories, iron, oil, the old truth of blood gone thin. Tom sat on the step and unlaced his boots like a man waiting for a verdict. Clara stood in the doorway, badge dimmed by kitchen light, her voice soft but nailed straight. Rules and reports, chain of custody, a name they didn't say yet. Milo turned his head to the sound of her vowels, then back to the steady shore of Tom's breathing. He offered the dropper and Milo drank, throat working neat. Small swallows marked by the tap of tongue on glass. Between mouthfuls, Milo pressed his paw to Tom's chest and kept it there longer, as if the beat beneath could anchor the world. The room shrank again to a circle of warmth where decisions waited like animals at the tree line. Night shouldered up against the windows and stayed. Clara left with a promise thin as radio wire. Tom fed the stove until the iron glowed a deeper red and laid his hand along Milo's spine. The kitten leaned, blind face tipped toward the warmth of his skin. Outside, wind worried the latch once, then lost interest. Inside, two heartbeats learn the same pace. Later, when the fire sank to coals, Tom stood and held the curtain an inch apart. Snow kept its counsel. He pictured the claw emblem on a moving sleeve, the arc of a bag, the silence after. Behind him, Milo yawned a small, surprised sound and tucked his nose under his foreleg. The stove ticked. The mountains settled back into their winter sleep. Before he slept, Tom wrote a line in the thin book he kept by the lamp. The page took the pencil without protest. He didn't write about traps or law. He wrote what the room had taught him. The blind know a house by its breathing. He looked over at Milo and saw what he had not planned to carry. Then he closed the book and let the dark do its gentle work. Morning came thin and pearly, the kind of light that doesn't push, just arrives. Milo woke to the stove's low breath and the small, sure music of a spoon against tin. He turned his blind face to it, whiskers combing the air. The house spoke in textures, rug edge, chair leg, Tom's wool sleeve, and he listened the way others looked, collecting a map without lines. Tom laid 2 fingertips on the floorboards and tapped a slow pattern 3 beats. Space. 2. The sound walked along the grain, soft as moth wings. Milo lifted, unsteady, then set one paw toward that rhythm. When the tapping shifted to the right, he angled with it, nose tasting a tender seam of warm air. Each step wrote courage into the boards. They practiced in short circles. Tom slid a bell cap along the baseboard, a faint chime rolling like water. Milo's ears cupped and turned, catching the shine. He followed that thread until the sound dimmed, then paused, letting quiet come back as shape. When his whiskers grazed the tin bowl, he stopped, and a satisfied little sound rose from his throat. Now and then, Tom tapped the underside of the table, a hollow note that meant turn. Milo learned the corner by its echo, by the cool shade that gathered there like folded cloth. He stood a while inside that pocket of air, body listening, then stepped out, confident, returning to the warm river by the stove where breath came easiest. Late light crossed the floor in long, pale arrows. Milo found the edge of that light as if it hummed the faintest prickle on fur where sun warmed dust. He turned into it, stretched long, and felt heat print his ribs. Outside, wind braided the aspens. The house settled with a tired sigh, wood telling stories to nails about years it had already held. A tire hissed on packed snow far down the turn. Milo's ears flicked, then quieted. The latch breathed once under a smaller weight. No door moved. Under the mat, something ticked metal against wood, then stopped. Milo rose. Reading disturbance, the way water reads a stone. The room held its breath. Tom stood very still, breath narrow, listening with him. Tom stepped out and came back in with cold on his sleeves. He set a single cartridge on the table. Brass, dull with wet. No note. Just the weight of warning. Milo turned to the scent. A thin knife of oil and old thunder. Tom slid the bullet into a drawer and closed it soft. The sound like a conversation ending before it could begin. Clara arrived at dusk. Badge buried under a scarf. Edges of her hair lit with frost. She listened to the story the floor told. Then to Tom's. "You know what the law says," she murmured. Voice low enough not to stir fear. "And you know what your heart says." Milo stood between them, head tipped to the warm place where their words met and braided. She knelt, held out a knuckle. Let Milo scent her. He pressed his nose there. A small benediction. Rehab would be safer, she said. Eyes on the kitten. Less personal. Tom's hand hovered mid-air. A weather front he could not move. "He has a house here," he said, meaning more than shelter. Milo stepped into the palm and stayed. They talked in circles that were really lines. Paperwork, risk, men who taped bags and drove away. Clara's phone hummed with names that didn't have faces yet. She stood to leave and touched Tom's shoulder there and gone, as if to say both of us are carrying this. Milo followed her steps by their low cotton hush and the cold the doorway let in. After the door shut, the cabin gathered itself. Tom moved the box an inch closer to the stove and set a covered brick of heat beneath. He tapped out their old pattern, 3 beats. Space. 2. Milo answered by rising and finding the dropper by memory of the last kindness. He drank in careful swallows, pausing to rest his paw against the steady drum of Tom's chest. Night came on like a slow tide. Milo navigated to the rug by the chair and circled, measuring the edge with whiskers until the radius felt right. When he lay down, the floor hummed with a warmth he now trusted. Tom lowered his hand and let it rest lightly between Milo's ears. The kitten leaned into that touch, small and sure as a promise kept. Wind worried the eaves once, then lost interest. In the drawer, the cartridge slept like a bad dream. On the table, a bell cap waited for tomorrow's lesson. Milo's breath found the room's pace. Unhurried, tide coming in. Outside, the aspens whispered their thin winter hymn. Inside, trust held its small, bright shape and asked for nothing more than time. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in along the window seams, a hush that thickened until the trees vanished behind a white veil. Inside, heat pooled low around the stove and left the corners thin and blue. Milo lifted his head to the change, reading the air with whiskers and breath. Snow brushed the eaves like a careful hand deciding whether to knock. By noon, the world wore a single colour. The thermometer on the porch stopped pretending and dropped. Milo's fur felt heavier with the damp he couldn't see, and his breath caught, a small hitch that troubled the quiet. He prowled the rug to stay warm, but sleep kept stealing him by the scruff and carrying him under. Tom touched his ear and found too much heat. Power blinked once, the lights dimming like a thought reconsidered, then steadied. Tom mixed a thin formula, counted the swallows, and listened to a furnace that suddenly sounded unsure. Milo drank, paused, tucked his paws, and shivered like a tiny machine losing rhythm. When the power went black for good, the room exhaled and left them to the ancient rules. Tom hauled wood, fed the stove hard, and set a brick to heat beneath a doubled shirt. He called Clara. The radio returned only weather low. Flat. All promise and no road. Wind braided the cabin walls until the nails spoke. Milo's breathing went quick, then shallow, then slow again, as if testing exits. The choice landed like a snowdrift, stay or go now. He packed as if the decision had been waiting in the pack all along. Blanket, matches, flask, a coil of line, the dropper in a pocket where body heat survives. He lined the scarf, slid Milo into the warm hollow, and tied the ends across his chest. The kitten pressed his face to the drum of a heart he knew by sound, and the small weight steadied to it. The door fought him with a hard shoulder of snow. Outside, night appeared at mid-afternoon, a thick, moving thing. Each step off the porch vanished behind him, as if the mountain disliked evidence. Wind plucked at his hood and shoved. He set his head to it and walked the turn he'd walked 100 times in good weather. Now a rumour under his boots. Milo read his body for direction, the angles and jolts telling him more than sight ever could. He nested deeper in the scarf and listened to the storm speak in broken lines. When Tom slipped on the buried rock, the world tilted hard. They went down together soft, then cruel. Snow-filled collar and glove. A silence opened that did not feel like rest. Tom lay there long enough to hear the storm forget his name. The cold found the gaps it always finds. He felt the old, sweet argument begin the one that says, lie still. You've done enough. Then a paw, no heavier than a word, lifted inside the scarf and pressed his ribs. It stayed there, clumsy but sure, tapping his life back to him in small beats. He pulled his breath together and made it into a rope. He grabbed a branch, shouldered up, and let the mountain know he would not be subtracted so easily. The ranger shack stood a half-mile off, a dark idea behind the white. He took a step and then another, counting in the same slow pattern he'd taught Milo on the boards. 3 beats. Space. 2. The shack door scraped open with the reluctant courtesy of old wood. Inside smelled like dust, and last summer, Tom found the stove by muscle memory, shook out fire from the oldest tricks he had, and built a heat that would not insult the night. He set Milo near the glow and unwrapped the scarf, murmuring the way you speak to fragile things that still choose you. Milo lay small and listening, breath thin but truer near warmth. Tom warmed the dropper in his hands, offered the lip, and saw the tiny tongue find it by faith. 3 swallows. Space. 2. Then rest. Steam rose off Tom's coat and his own breath. He hadn't known he was shaking until it slowed. The storm leaned at the door and reconsidered its purpose. Time shortened to practical tasks. Add wood. Check pause. Turn the kitten so heat met him evenly. Wipe the crusted fur around the closed eyes. Somewhere near morning, the wind lost its knife. Milo's ears twitched toward the first crackle of melt. He stretched small, deliberate, and tucked a forepaw against Tom's thumb, as if pinning him to the moment. Dawn was not gold so much as permission. The window found a colour again. Tom dozed sitting up, hand curved over Milo's back. Fire drawn down to a patient red. When he woke, he listened before he looked. The shack breathed. The mounting kept them. Milo's chest rose and fell with the quiet pride of survivors. And the day waited without hurry to be named. Morning didn't arrive so much as loosen its grip on the dark. The shack stove breathed a steady hush, and Milo slept in the shallow bowl of Tom's scarf. Fur warmed to a quiet glow. When the wind finally forgot their names, the silence stepped closer. Tom watched the kitten's ribs rise and fall, and let his own breath match that small, insistent rhythm. He reheated a little formula between his hands until the glass felt like a living thing. When the dropper touched Milo's lip, the mouth worked, unsure at first, then certain. 3 swallows. Space. 2. The kitten paused, tasting the room the way he always did, by heat, by scent, by the drum of a man's heart close enough to trust. Light pried a thin seam in the frost on the window. It wasn't gold yet, just a softer grey that promised weather with edges. Milo turned his face toward it. The lids did not open, but the clouded orbs beneath shifted, as if following warmth through skin. Tom saw the almost of it and didn't name it hope. He simply offered the dropper again. Boots crunched outside, slow and careful, a knuckle rapped twice, tempering courtesy with worry. Clara stepped in with a rush of cold and relief tangled together. She took in the stove, the scarf, Tom's face drawn to the wire. "You made it," she said, and the words were more blanket than praise. Her eyes found the kitten and softened. She knelt and held a palm near Milo without touching. Heat answered heat. The kitten sniffed, ears cupping toward the shape of her breath. "Vitals?" she asked, voice low. Tom told her about the night, the fall, the rise again. She listened the way good listeners do whole, quiet, without cutting the story to fit a form. They worked in small choreography. Clara checked pause, gums, the slow pinch at the scruff. Tom kept time with the dropper and the fire. The radio on the shelf hummed a reluctant green. Roads were passable where ploughed, which meant not here yet. The shack's old walls held the weather at the door like a bouncer who owed them a favour. When Clara moved her hand across the window seam, a brighter wedge slid along the floor. It found Milo's whiskers and printed their shadows on the scarf. For a heartbeat, he stilled, then lifted his head a fraction higher. Blind face aimed at the light as if a thought had brushed it. Tom felt that small tilt in his chest, a notch reopening. They decided to wait for a patrol rig to break the lower drifts. Waiting made a shape around them, feed, rest, warm, repeat. Milo dozed and woke and dozed again. Each returned to the world steadier than the last. When Tom ran a fingertip along the bridge of his nose, the kitten leaned into it, claiming touch the way the cold once claimed time. Near noon, a stray sunbeam wandered deep enough to kiss Milo's brow. His lids fluttered. Under the milk-blue haze, something quivered like a pilot light testing air. Not sight. Not yet, but an answer to brightness. A flinch, and then a curious lean. Clara caught it and met Tom's look, both of them holding still so the moment wouldn't spook. The rig arrived with a tired horn and a churn of snow against fender. Clara wrapped Milo in the scarf and passed him to Tom like passing a secret across a crowded room. Outside was all glare and honest cold. The kitten tucked his face in and rode the drum of footsteps to the truck. Each jolt a code he could read without fear. On the bench seat, the heater coughed and then remembered its job. Tom cupped Milo close, and Clara drove slow, hands steady on a road that didn't deserve it. Pines slid by like quiet witnesses. In the passenger window's reflection, Tom saw only a man carrying a life light enough to disappear and heavy enough to change him. Back at the cabin, the familiar air greeted them: wood smoke, wool, the shy sweetness of warm milk. Milo let his paws slip to the flannel and stood, swaying, head tilted toward the stove's old lullaby. He took 2 small steps, and then another, found the edge of sun on the boards, and chose it. The room exhaled like someone had finally answered. Evening rinsed the day with a thin wash of amber. The storm had spent itself. The house had not. Tom wrote a single line and closed the book without reading it back. Milo slept, one forepaw resting over Tom's wrist as if pinning him to now. Outside, the aspens shook loose a few tired crystals. Inside, recovery set its table and pulled up a chair. Spring didn't burst over the ridge. It unbuttoned itself slowly. Snow retreated in thin seams along the aspens, exposing dark earth and old secrets. Milo felt it first in the softness of the air. The cold that once cut now only brushed. On the cabin floor, he woke and tested each breath like a new room he'd been invited into. Tom opened the door and let the outside spill in wet soil. Pine sap, meltwater running somewhere unseen. Milo turned his head and climbed down from the box without help. His paws met wood, then threshold, then the unsure grit of the porch. He paused, reading light and wind, small body listening to a world growing wider around him. On the step, sun found him. It painted his fur in pale gold, warming each ridge left by winter's hands. Milo lifted his face. The lids fluttered, the clouded blue beneath shifting. Something pricked behind that haze. Not shape, not yet, but brightness. He leaned toward it, ears forward, answering a distant name he almost knew. Tom watched from a half step back, hands useless in the best way. Easy, he murmured, though Milo was easier with this than he was. The Bobcat Kitten padded forward, following warmth, sound, the hollow knock of Tom's boot on wood. At the edge of the porch, he stopped, feeling the sheer drop of open air waiting below. Tom tapped a gentle pattern on the packed earth beneath the steps. Milo stretched one paw into space, found the edge, then slid down in a small, clumsy hop. The ground met him with a cool, living give. Grass stubble brushed his pads. Meltwater whispered along a rut. He turned in place, drinking every detail that wasn't darkness or fear. They moved a slow circle in the yard. Tom's voice marked soft boundaries, low and steady, like a line drawn in river sand. Milo tracked him, veering only when a brighter warmth slid across his face. Twice, the lids lifted a fraction and light slipped in like a test. Each blink left him more curious than afraid of that thin door. Inside later, Tom called Dr. Lewis on a clearer line. He described the flinches, the half blinks, how Milo seemed to follow, not just sound now, but shadows of glow. The old vet hummed, the sound of someone pleased, yet cautious. Scar tissue, maybe loosening. Some nerves remember how. He said, let him work it out. Don't push sight on him. Days stacked like careful stones. Milo gained weight, muscle knitting under his coat. He learned the pattern of sun across the room by feel and, quietly, by something more. Once, when Tom set the bowl down without a word, Milo turned toward it before it rang the floorboards. Gratitude landed between them, heavy, bright, and unspoken. News of Wade Harrow's arrest came on a crackling call one evening. Clara's voice carried a tired satisfaction and the clink of handcuffs far away. They had the footage, the traps, the proof. Milo lay on the rug, tail tip ticking as if sensing a wire cut in the dark. For the first time, the past felt farther than the next dawn. With Harrow gone, talk of moving Milo to an official centre rose again, like smoke that wouldn't clear. Tom listened to the reasons expert care. Bigger runs, legal boxes checked in neat rows. That night, Milo climbed onto his lap uninvited, pressed his chest against Tom's, and stayed. The argument thinned. Some homes exist beyond forms. As the last snow bled away, the pull of outside grew stronger in Milo's bones. He traced the doorway often, sitting where breeze and stove heat braided together. One afternoon, while Tom sorted photographs he could barely bring himself to print, Milo slipped down the step alone. His paws remembered the yard without waiting for a guiding tap. At the far edge of the clearing, where pine shadow stitched itself into light, Milo paused. The lids lifted, and for a breath he caught the ghost of Tom's shape against the sky, a darker warmth, a familiar anchor. It startled him, but not with fear. He turned his head, memorizing the sound of that stillness, then faced the calling trees. Tom stepped to the porch, a call half built in his throat. Milo's ears twitched. He did not run. He walked, deliberate and grave, into the green smear of undergrowth. Tail low, body loose. The forest took him a fern at a time, until he was only suggestion among trunks. Tom didn't follow. Love. He knew now. Sometimes means standing still. Evening found an empty rug and a quiet stove. The cabin felt larger, but not hollow. On the floor by the door, a single pale hair caught the light, curved like a comma instead of a period. Tom left it there, a small marker that the story had moved forward. Outside, something moved soft between trees. Inside, a man waited, open instead of broken. The first snow of the new winter came quiet, just a dusting that silvered the porch and softened the road. Tom woke before the alarm that he no longer set and brewed coffee by habit. Not need. The cabin hummed in its small, familiar ways. Outside, the aspens held their breath. It felt like any other morning that had learned to live without waiting. He stepped onto the porch with his mug cupped in both hands. The air bit, clean and thin, the way it does before real storms. He let his one good eye trace the tree line the way his boots had traced it for years. Nothing unusual, just pale trunks. Early light. The same silence that had become an old, patient friend. He was halfway through his first sip when something shifted at the brush line. Not the jerk of a deer or the low shape of a coyote. This was slower. Deliberate. A pale form eased out from between the trees. White coat catching the weak sun. Moving with a balance that remembered pain and had outgrown it. Tom lowered the mug without meaning to. Milo stood at the edge of the clearing as if he had never left and had walked 1,000 miles. His fur was thick and clean, shoulder muscles rolling like quiet water. One eye still clouded, the other holding a clear, steady burn of gold amber light. He faced the cabin and did not flinch. Tom's throat closed on his own name for him. For a long breath, neither moved. The years between them pressed close, then slipped aside. Milo took 3 slow steps forward, paws barely bending the crusted snow. His good eye stayed on Tom. The cloudy one turned slightly, as if honoring the dark that had led him first. Tom gripped the railing, not from age this time, but from awe. Then the peak arrived, soft and impossible. From behind Milo, 2 smaller shapes tumbled into view, a pair of kittens. Mottled grey and cream, paws too big for their certainty. One blinked with bright, fearless eyes. The other's left eye held a pale film, not blind, but remembering. They clustered at Milo's flank, pressing into his leg like a moving promise. Tom's breath left him in a sound that wasn't quite a laugh or a sob. He had pictured this moment in quieter wishes, only to dismiss it as a man's indulgence. Yet here it was, the blind kitten he'd carried against his chest, now standing whole. A father with his own small, fragile stormbreakers at his side. It stole every word he thought he'd say. Milo glanced back at the kittens, gave the faintest nudge, guiding them away from the open, closer to the safety of brush. The gesture was careful, patient, tender in a wild, unsentimental way. Then he looked up at Tom again, and in that single-held gaze lay the shack, the storm, the dropper, the shared rhythm of borrowed breaths that refused to quit. Tom stepped down one stair, then stopped himself. He knew better now. Some distances are sacred. He lifted his hand instead, palm open, fingers shaking just enough to tell the truth. "You made it," he whispered, though he knew Milo already knew that. The bobcat's ears twitched. His good eye softened. If such a thing can. Snowflakes began to fall slow, wide, almost theatrical in their timing. The kittens pressed closer to their father, curious but cautious, sensing the line between house and woods. The one with the veiled eye lifted its head toward Tom, as if drawn by a heartbeat it recognized from a story it had only been told through scent. For a heartbeat that stretched wider than the sky. The world held still. Man on the steps, cat at the tree line. Two young lives, threaded between. Milo dipped his head once. A bow so slight it might have been wind, except the wind did not carry gratitude like that. Then he turned, nudged his kittens, and slipped back into the trees. Tom stayed where he was, long after their shapes dissolved into the pale timber. The clearing looked ordinary again, which made what had happened sit even louder in his chest. He went inside without closing the door for a moment, letting the cold reach the rug where Milo used to sleep, as if inviting the memory to come and go freely. At the table, he opened his old notebook, thumbed past damp-edged pages of nights and storms and small victories. On a clean line he wrote, with a steadier hand than he expected. He left blind and came back leading. The pen hesitated, then added, "Some debts are never asked for, only honored." It felt like truth, not decoration. He closed the book and set it by the window where the light could find it. Outside, the snow thickened, erasing tracks almost as soon as they were made. Tom watched until white filled the frame. Somewhere beyond, a one-eyed bobcat taught his young how to trust their feet, their ears, their strange bright chances. Inside, the man who once broke the rules finally felt them set right. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.